For this list, we'll be specifically focusing on feats that can help you be a better Warlock by making the most out of your limited spell slots and charisma stat, rather than feats that generally make you a stronger character. So, feats like Tough, which is generally useful for every class due to just making your maximum hit points higher, and thus making you harder to kill, won't be included despite how strong the feat is overall. And what better way to start off this list at number 10 than with Eldritch Adept from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This feat allows you to select one Eldritch Invocation, a class feature you gain by default as your Warlock levels up, but with one major restriction. You must meet the prerequisite of whatever invocation you choose. As for what Eldritch Invocations do, they are basically options you take at certain Warlock levels to give yourself a little bit of customization. There are a total of 54 invocations you can choose from, but can only learn a total of 8 invocations starting at 18th level. Some invocations allow you to modify Eldritch Blast, a Warlock's bread and butter cantrip which deals 1d10 force damage per bolt, with modifications such as Agonizing Blast to allow each bolt to deal extra force damage equal to your charisma modifier. Or if you've taken Pact of the Blade, you can take Thirsting Blade in order to give yourself extra attack and allow yourself to attack twice with your Pact weapon whenever, which can work well if you're going for a Gish build such as Hexblade, which is a subclass that is a bit of a mix between a spellcaster and a martial class. Invocations are very important to Warlocks because they allow for many different combinations of abilities to work in tandem with whatever build they're going for, and there's usually something for everyone. This is what makes Eldritch Adept a pretty good starting point for this list, as it allows you to further customize your Warlock by granting them that one last invocation that you might be looking at. However, the reason why this feat only takes number 10 spot on this list is because this feat is technically meant for classes that aren't Warlocks. A wizard might take Armor of Shadows just so they can cast Mage Armor without expending a spell slot every day. Of course, this does mean that these other classes most likely won't be able to take Agonizing Blast or Thirsting Blade, since you can't take any invocations that has a requirement, regardless if you meet them or not. However, as a Warlock taking this feat, the only restriction you have to worry about are the ones already in place to begin with, such as being able to take Thirsting Blade, but not being able to take Gift of the Protectors, since both require different pact boons in order to take. Pack of the Blade and Pack of the Tome, respectively. Unfortunately, having 9 invocations rather than 8 doesn't really matter that much at the end of the day, unless you are really eyeballing an invocation that you've been sitting on for a very long time. However, taking Eldritch Adept does also allow you to gain an additional invocation 3 levels sooner than you normally would, which can help round out your build sooner rather than later, granting you a total of 4 invocations at 5th level, rather than 3. So while this feat does let you Warlock a little better by giving you an additional invocation, its impact compared to other entries on this list is just too low to be any higher on this list, since most Warlocks would be prioritizing on the best invocations for their build in the first place, and would most likely not even need this feat, unless they're trying to make their build come online just a bit sooner. And at number 9, we have Metamagic Adept, also from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This feat allows you to learn 2 metamagic options that are normally only reserved for sorcerers. You follow the typical rules for how metamagic works, where you can only apply 1 option per spell unless the metamagic states otherwise. You can also replace one of the metamagic options you pick for this feat with another every time you reach a level that grants you an ability score increase, just in case you're not 100% on what you initially picked. Additionally, you are also granted 2 sorcery points, so you can actually use the metamagic options you pick and regain all spent points after finishing a long rest. It's also important to note that these sorcery points can only be spent on metamagic options, so no converting these points into spell slots like a sorcerer can. Fortunately, there are plenty of other fun things you can do with metamagic as a Warlock. Careful Spell lets you spend 1 sorcery point to allow you to choose a number of creatures up to your charisma modifier, and a minimum of 1 creature, to automatically save against one of your saving throws against a wide AoE spell, which can make spells like Hypnotic Pattern much more reliable, as you don't have to worry about your teammates being in the way of it when you cast it. Distant Spell can double the range of any of your spells that have a range of 5 feet or greater, while also turning spells with a range of touch to have a range of 30 feet instead. This can be really funny to pull off with Eldritch Blast, as it already has a range of 120 feet. A 240 foot range on a cantrip sounds pretty insane on paper, but we can make this even funnier by taking the Eldritch Spear invocation to upgrade Eldritch Blast's range to 300 feet. With the Distant Spell, this goes all the way up to 600 feet, which is absolutely insane in terms of map coverage. However, if you also take the Spell Sniper feat, you can go even further beyond and have 1200 range feet of Eldritch Blast, which pretty much means you're only limited by whichever enemies are hiding behind total cover on any given map. If you can see it, you can probably shoot it. Subtle Spell is another great option for when you want to cast something like Sickening Radiance without risk of being counterspelled, since Subtle Spell lets you cast something without needing to use their verbal or somatic components. Quicken Spell is another fantastic option, but does cost 2 sorcery points to use, essentially giving you the ability to, once per long rest, cast a spell that requires 1 action as a bonus action instead. This can go great with spells like Shatter, which deal 3d8 thunder damage in an AoE, while also giving you the ability to cast Eldritch Blast for your action. Or even better, you can just cast Eldritch Blast for both your action and bonus action on the same turn. At 17th level, that's a total of 8d10 force damage, and an additional 40 damage flat if you're running Agonizing Blast with +5 Charisma, which is an incredible burst of damage even if you can only do it once per long rest. To put this into perspective, the Illusionist Bracers is a very rare magic item from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and gives you the ability to recast a cantrip as a bonus action a second time on the same turn. You are essentially replicating this effect once per long rest. Moving on, however, Twin Spell might seem like a good pick, but it comes with one major drawback. The way Twin Spell works is that you have to spend a number of sorcery points equal to the spell's level. After that, you can target a second creature with the same spell, but only if that spell is incapable of targeting more than one creature. This means you can't Twin Spell an Eldritch Blast beyond 5th level, as each bolt lets you target different creatures. But you can Twin Spell Firebolt, which deals all of its damage to your target. But another problem that arises is due to how Warlocks work. Unlike other spellcasters, Warlocks get a very limited number of spell slots, up to 4 at 17th level. There are 2 ways the game compensates for this change. The first way is that Warlocks regain all of their spell slots after a short rest instead of a long rest. The second, and arguably more important way, is that every spell that a Warlock can cast automatically scales to their current spell slot level. For instance, a 3rd level Warlock has 2nd level spell slots, meaning that all of their 1st level spells now automatically upcast to 2nd level. What this means for Twin Spell Metamagic option is that, since you only gain 2 sorcery points, you can only use this Metamagic option to 5th level, where you gain 3rd level spells and then you can't use it anymore. This means that, unless you have a way of obtaining this feat at 1st level, such as through the means of rolling a variant human, custom lineage, or a house rule, you would only get use out of this Metamagic option at 4th level, where you would take this feat. However, there are a lot of other good options you can take that the loss of Twin Spell isn't so bad, especially when you consider that it wouldn't even work with Eldritch Blast for very long. That being said, you could still use Twin Spell for cantrips that target a single creature, but that's really it. As for why Metamagic Adept only takes number 9 on this list, it's mainly due to the fact that it does require you to use a resource that you don't normally get as a Warlock, which can be severely limiting, especially since you regain so many things on a short rest, while sorcery points are only restored on a long rest. Having 2 sorcery points means you get 1, maybe 2 chances to do something interesting with your spells, and then you're done for the day, whereas there are plenty of other entries on this list that are online way more often. And at number 8, we have Inspiring Leader from the Player's Handbook. This feat allows you to spend 10 minutes inspiring up to 6 friendly creatures that can see or hear you and understand you within 30 feet of you, granting them temporary hit points equal to your level plus your charisma modifier. Once a creature gains these temporary hit points, they can't do so again until they finish a short or long rest. This is a great way to make use of your already high charisma stat by giving your party a ton of bonus temp HP for enemies to burn through. And the number of temporary hit points you can grant is nothing to sneeze at either. At 8th level, assuming a +5 charisma bonus, you can essentially grant each party member a buffer of 13 hit points. For an average party of 4, that comes out to a total of 52 total hit points that your DM would have to burn through to take out your entire party. And since these temporary hit points don't have a stated duration, they effectively last until they're depleted, or until creatures that have those temp hit points finish a long rest by default. But what's really nice about this feat in particular for Warlocks is the fact that, while you don't necessarily need to provide this inspiring speech during rest, this feat does give them something else to do during their short rest while recovering their spell slots. And since hopefully your DM would naturally be giving your party more short rest to accommodate your lack of spell slots, Inspiring Leader is a great way to take advantage of any extra short rest you might be provided. The only real downside of this feat is that you do have to spend 10 minutes inspiring your companions, which can be hard to do from a role-playing perspective. However, you can always provide highlights that your DM will, hopefully, understand so that you don't have to spend 10 straight minutes every session providing an empowering speech, unless it's right before a big event in the game, such as raiding the big bad evil guy's lair. As for why Inspiring Leader only takes number 8 on this list, it's because it doesn't necessarily make you a better Warlock, but does allow you to make better use of your primary stat, allowing you to squeeze the most out of this feat with no real effort put in. But because there are better feats on this list that make better use of your charisma, Inspiring Leader can't really be any higher on this list as a result. And at number 7, we have Warcaster from the Player's Handbook. This feat grants you 3 unique benefits that can really help you as a Warlock. It provides you with advantage on all concentration checks you may to sustain a spell whenever you take damage, allows you to perform the somatic components of spells even if your hands are occupied with a shield or weapon in one or both hands, and grants you the ability to use your reaction to cast a spell instead of making an opportunity attack at a creature whenever they provoke an opportunity attack against you. However, this spell must have a casting time of 1 action and must target only that creature. With the way this last part of the feat is worded, it's debatable whether or not something like Eldritch Blast, which can target multiple creatures starting at 5th level, would be able to function with this part of the feat. Unlike the twin spell metamagic option, where it very clearly states what kind of spell is kosher to use for that option, the wording here is a bit more ambiguous. While it might not be game-breaking to allow Scorching Ray or Magic Missile to be cast if you only target the creature provoking the opportunity attack, it's also understandable if a DM might not allow it. However, even if that weren't the case, Booming Blade is an excellent cantrip that scales insanely well and doesn't even require any shenanigans to pull off. Essentially, you can make an attack normally against one creature within 5 feet of you, which causes that creature to be engulfed in magical energy that damages them for 1d8 thunder damage if they willingly move 5 feet or more before the start of your next turn, ending the spell once the damage has been dealt. While seemingly unimpressive at first, the damage of this cantrip scales very well, especially if you get the secondary effect to trigger consistently. At 5th level, your weapon attack you make when casting the spell deals an extra 1d8 thunder damage, while the damage the creature takes when moving goes up to 2d8 thunder damage. At 11th level, it goes up to 2d8 and 3d8, followed by 17th level where it goes up to 3d8 and 4d8 respectively, for a total potential damage of 7d8 extra thunder damage for a cantrip. This is important to note because with how Booming Blade works, you are essentially putting a creature that provokes an opportunity attack from you to make the choice of whether or not they want to continue moving away from you, or to stay where they are and fight you. As for the other 2 benefits listed in this feat, being able to cast somatic components, even while wielding a shield or handling 2 weapons, doesn't seem strong at first. However, one of the Warlock subclasses, the Hexblade, allows for you to gain proficiency in martial weapons, medium armor, and shields, which makes Warcaster insanely useful for that subclass. And remember when we said that Booming Blade allows you to make a weapon attack when casting the spell? Well, Hexblade can make extremely good use of this, since they can use their charisma modifier in place of their strength or dexterity, making Booming Blade much easier to land on a creature you want it to. But the best part about the Warcaster feat is, of course, the ability to have advantage on concentration checks. While it might not be as important as a sorcerer needing to maintain concentration on a double haste, Warlocks definitely benefit from having better overall concentration simply because of how bad it feels to lose concentration on something like Hex when you only have so many spell slots to work with. So maintaining your concentration is kind of important. Unfortunately, without a way to gain proficiency in Constitution saving throws, such as through the Resilient feat, Warcaster can only do so much to help you. But to cement the reason why Warcaster only takes number 7 on this list, you only have to look at the Warlock's available Eldritch invocations. Unless you're taking Warcaster for the other 2 benefits, Eldritch Mind allows you to roll concentration checks with advantage as well, which is the most generally useful benefit Warcaster provides to all Warlocks. And as soon as you reach 2nd level, rather than 4th for most characters. Overall, there's no doubt that Warcaster is an amazing feat for spellcasters to take in general. However, seeing as how the main draw of Warcaster is already available to you without the use of the feat, Warcaster takes a lower spot on this list. Fortunately though, Warcaster still provides 2 other very good benefits in case you roll a Hexblade Warlock, so it takes a higher spot on this list than it probably would have otherwise. And at number 6, we have Telekinetic from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. This feat grants you the benefit of a half ASI, allowing you to increase your choice of intelligence, wisdom, or charisma by 1, up to a maximum of 20. Additionally, you gain a modified version of Mage Hand. When you cast this cantrip, you can do so without verbal or somatic components, and you can make the hand invisible. You also gain an increased range of 30 feet for this spell whenever you cast Mage Hand if you already know it. With this special version of Mage Hand, you can use a bonus action to telekinetically shove a creature you can see within 30 feet of you, forcing a strength saving throw, whose DC equals 8 plus your proficiency bonus with whatever ability modifier you choose when increasing this feat. If the creature fails their saving throw, you can move that creature 5 feet away or towards yourself. It's also worth noting that a creature can willingly fail this save, allowing you to potentially displace an ally for whatever reason. Maybe they're slightly in range of a hypnotic pattern that you want to throw out, or maybe you want to get someone out of a sticky situation by shoving them just out of range of a couple of enemies, so they don't have to use a disengage action to not provoke opportunity attacks, since forced movement wouldn't provoke them. While this might not be the strongest feat on this list, it's definitely one of the more underrated feats in general. Having an invisible Mage Hand can do wonders for scouting an area for traps, causing mischief, or grabbing small objects from a distance. But what's great about this feat is that, for Warlocks, it gives them something to do with their bonus action, which they are kind of starved for outside of casting Hex at the beginning of combat. Shoving a creature as a bonus action for 5 feet every turn can be rather annoying to a bandit that is just out of range of being able to reach you without dashing. Or if a creature is taking advantage of high ground, such as an archer, you can shove them towards you to knock them down to the ground. Or if you're just feeling mean, you can shove creatures off of high ground outside of combat, which you can then play off as having them tripped over a rock or something. Mage Hand in general is one of those cantrips that's as useful as the player's ability to get creative with it, which is why this feat can't really take a higher spot on this list, since it's definitely not a feat for everyone. However, the bonus action shove is useful enough that, even if you're not the most creative person in the world, you can still get plenty of use out of this feat. And at number 5, we have Resilient from the Player's Handbook. This is a half ASI feat that has a solid interaction with itself by allowing you to, first, choose an ability score to increase by 1 to a max of 20. Then, whatever ability score you increase, you now gain proficiency in saving throws for the chosen ability. This is a very simple feat which holds a lot of impact, especially for spellcasters, since it allows you to give yourself proficiency in Constitution saving throws, and therefore a proficiency in concentration checks. This is important for the same reason that Warcaster is important for spellcasters. Better concentration checks equals better sustain for your concentration spells. It feels bad to lose concentration on Hex, Slow, or Hypnotic Pattern, so why not just make it so that your enemies can't break your concentration as easily? You can also combine this feat with Warcaster or Eldritch Mind to not only add your proficiency modifier to your concentration checks, but also make them with advantage, which is why Resilient ranks so high on this list. At the end of the day, there isn't really much more that can be said about this feat that hasn't already been said previously. It's just a really solid feat with a very solid purpose. That being said, however, better concentration checks aren't everything when it comes to playing a Warlock, which is why it still only takes number 5. And at number 4, we have Elven Accuracy from Xanathar's Guide to Everything. This feat grants you 2 benefits. A half ASI that lets you increase your dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, or charisma by 1 to a max of 20. And whenever you have advantage on an attack roll using any of the aforementioned stats, you can re-roll one of the dice once, effectively giving you double advantage without actually saying it. This is a very powerful feat that allows you to reliably hit and fish for critical hits with basically any attack roll you make that doesn't rely on strength. But this works especially well with Eldritch Blast, which would already use your charisma modifier for its attack rolls. So if you find a way to give yourself advantage on command, such as through the Greater Invisibility spell if you're using an Undead Warlock, or by taking advantage of the Darkness spell by using Devil's Sight to allow you to see through it, thus giving yourself advantage due to your enemies not being able to see you, then Elven Accuracy makes very quick work of your opponents, especially since Eldritch Blast critical hits tend to be very deadly when multiple bolts crit in succession. The best part of this feat that is never talked about is the fact that, unlike other feats where it only works with whatever stat you choose to boost, Elven Accuracy lets you re-roll your advantage when you make an attack roll, using any of the listed stats, regardless of whatever stat you boosted. This can come in handy when you don't necessarily want to boost your charisma for whatever reason, but still want to take advantage of rerolling your Eldritch Blast attacks. However, as powerful as having double advantage on your attack rolls could be, the one caveat that holds this feat back from being any higher on this list is the fact that this feat, as the name suggests, requires you to be playing either an elf or half-elf race to even take the feat in the first place. While some feats are definitely worth taking certain prerequisites for, a lot of them tend to be something you can work towards, such as one of the 3 Adept of the X robe feats that you can unlock by taking initiative of high sorcery, rather than something you decide at character creation. Since not everyone wants to roll an elf or half-elf, you can't really change your race midway through a campaign through traditional means. So Elven Accuracy can't be any higher on this list. However, still retains a high spot on the list simply due to how strong its effect is when you consistently pull it off. And at number 3, we have Crossbow Expert from the Player's Handbook. This feat technically grants you 3 benefits, but for the most part we only really make use of one of them. The first and third benefit of this feat cater to what the name suggests: better use of our crossbow weapons. Specifically, ignoring the loading property of crossbows that you're proficient in, and allowed to use your bonus action to make an attack with a hand crossbow you're holding after using your attack action to make an attack with a one-handed weapon. Outside of multi-classing or running a Hexblade Warlock, you aren't going to have proficiency with any crossbows to make use of either of these benefits. However, the second benefit of this feat is a lot more generic and oftentimes worth taking for spellcasters just for this benefit alone. Your range attack rolls no longer suffer disadvantage while being within 5 feet of a hostile creature, which includes your ranged spell attack rolls as well. This naturally enhances your Eldritch Blast by allowing you to use it regardless of who is in your way, since the easiest way to displace a ranged attacker is to rush them down and mess with their accuracy. And anything that makes your go-to attack better is definitely worth putting on this list, especially since you'll most likely be using Eldritch Blast more than any other spell, which naturally means you'll be making use of this feat much more than most other classes would, which is why Crossbow Expert ranks so high in this list. However, what keeps it from being even higher is the fact that other benefits of this feat just aren't very useful to Warlocks, unless, as mentioned earlier, they multi-class or end up going Hexblade to gain crossbow proficiency. And at number 2, we have Spell Sniper from the PHB. This feat was mentioned earlier in the video, but now we get to go into more details. The first benefit has already been covered, but to reiterate, it doubles the range of all spells you cast that require an attack roll. It's important to note that this does not work with spells that have a range of self, meaning you can't use this feat with something like Booming Blade, which has a range of self and a 5 feet radius. However, as previously mentioned, doubling the range of your Eldritch Blast can be extremely useful in order to remain in the backlines as much as possible. And taking the Eldritch Spear Invocation increases your Eldritch Blast range to 300 feet, which is then doubled by Spell Sniper to 600 feet. Spell Sniper also allows your ranged spell attacks to ignore all forms of coverage that isn't total cover. And if, for some reason, you don't already have a spell that requires an attack roll, this feat grants you one cantrip that fulfills that requirement, and can also be chosen from either the Bard, Cleric, Druid, Sorcerer, Warlock, or Wizard spell lists. However, as a Warlock, you'd want to pick from the Bard, Sorcerer, or Warlock spell lists since your spellcasting modifier is entirely dependent on whatever spell list you choose from. In this case, it should be Charisma. While 600 feet of range for a cantrip might seem like a bit much, ignoring half and 3/4 cover is definitely always worth it, as it means creatures can't gain the normal +2 or +5 bonus to their AC for taking cover. And having a significant amount of range means that you can target pretty much anyone on any given map that isn't behind cover, so long as you can properly see them, of course. You're kind of out of luck if you're in a very dark cave, since your dark vision can only do so much for you. Even the Devil's Sight Invocation only allows you to see normally in magical and non-magical darkness to a distance of 120 feet. However, if you cast the darkness spell on yourself in a well-lit environment, you can still have your range of 600 feet, while also having advantage on all of your attack rolls due to your enemies not being able to see you. Meanwhile, enemies would have disadvantage on trying to hit you, and would potentially have to guess where you are inside the cloud of darkness. Overall, what makes Spell Sniper such a great feat for Warlocks is because it essentially upgrades your bread and butter strat of spamming Eldritch Blasts much more viable than other entries on this list. You can even combine this with Crossbow Expert to allow you to cast Eldritch Blast even if there are enemies within 5 feet of yourself. However, between the two feats, Spell Sniper is definitely more generally useful, as there are no inherent downsides to taking this feat, nor do you have to work on making the rest of this feat useful for you as you might with Crossbow Expert, which is why Spell Sniper takes a slightly higher spot on this list. And at number 1, we have Fey Touched, Shadow Touched, and Initiate of High Sorcery. and basically any other feat that grants you extra spells that you can cast without using your spell slots. Since Warlocks are usually limited to 2 or 3 spell slots for 75% of the game, you may as well start making your own, so to speak. That's exactly what makes these feats equally good and worth taking. While the spells they can provide might differ greatly in terms of usefulness and variety, they all fulfill the same purpose: useful spells at a reasonable price. To briefly go over some of the utilities some of these feats provide, Fey Touched is probably the most versatile and generally useful for Warlock, as it provides you with an escape option in the form of Misty Step, a second level spell which allows you to teleport 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see as a bonus action. You also learn any one first level spell that comes from the Divination or Enchantment School of Magic. This grants you access to a lot of support-based spells like Bane, Bless, and even Silvery Barbs, which are all normally inaccessible to Warlocks. This also feeds into another reason why all these feats are equally useful to take as a Warlock. They just don't have a wider range of spells to choose from as other classes do, despite knowing as many spells as a Sorcerer. So any spell you can learn, such as the Shield spell via Initiative High Sorcery, or Inflict Wounds via Shadow Touch, is always a solid boon to your repertoire. The only real drawback is these free casting of spells don't scale up to your Warlock spell slots. However, this is remedied by the fact that you can still cast these spells using your own spell slots, which would scale to the highest spell slot level if you really wanted to deal 5d10 necrotic damage with a 3rd level Inflict Wounds. To summarize, what makes these kinds of feats so amazing for Warlocks is the fact that they cover one of the Warlock's biggest weaknesses, which is not having enough spell slots to cast all other spells. And having so many free spells to cast can help differentiate yourself from other Warlocks by allowing you to do things other than spam Eldritch Blast every single turn, when you can just cast Inflict Wounds or Entangle via the Rune Shaper feat for a bit of crowd control. With so many ways to grant yourself free spells to cast, and how strong it is to make a caster with a few spell slots more diverse, and therefore more dangerous, there's just no way we can go over these feats separately, as we've done previously, since they all serve the singular benefit of making you a better Warlock by giving you more spells to use as a Warlock.